Thank you. So everybody, it is a minute after two, excuse me. I'm going to call everything to order, call this meeting to order. Today's really going to be wrapped around Spark Mill's presentation of the strategic plan. So we've got a little bit of business to do on the consent agenda. So I have the January 28th minutes as well as the monthly financial report. I'd like to try to take them together in a vote so we can get to Spark Mill as fast as possible. So if somebody can give me a first and a second, and we'll open up from discussion, take action, and move right into the meat of today's agenda. Anybody?
So moved.
Thank you, Ned. A second, please.
Second.
Oh, let me see. I think, Margaret, you slid in it just a little bit ahead of Greg. Just saying. Any discussion? Great. We'll just do a simple raise of hands. All in favor, say aye, and just raise their hands. Great. That's a yes. So we can put that one in the books and move on. So our third item is Spark Mill, and they're going to be presenting their preliminary findings report. And I'm going to, which most people would be very happy to hear, I'm going to put my microphone on mute and let the Spark Mill team take it over. So it's all is yours, guys.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Keith. It's great to see everyone today. And so we're delighted to be able to be with you all and to talk through the report. We sent it out ahead of time to give you all plenty of time to kind of read through it and mark up any questions that you might have. What's clear, what wasn't clear, what did you need kind of more information on? Did something seem wrong? A couple of things about the report, and when we do preliminary findings reports, as you saw in the actual structure of the report, the theme itself is our words, it's our language, based on what we heard in multiple stakeholder conversations. And then we gave quotes that support the theme. And sometimes in the quotes, you see things that are contradictory of each other. Sometimes you see things that are, maybe you're like, that's not right. I know this stuff, and that's just absolutely not right. And keep in mind that perception is reality, and that is what that stakeholder's perception was. As it pertained to things. And so what we're looking for in all of the themes and in the quotes is that what is the nugget of truth, the kernel of wisdom that we're trying to gain from this, and what do we want to do with it? The purpose of our preliminary findings report is to give you all information so that you can make data informed decisions, not data driven per se, but data informed, so that whatever decisions that the regional housing partnership makes, you're making it in light of what you've heard from your stakeholders. And so that's the purpose of the report. And so with that, Rachel, if you'll share your screen, we're just going to walk through the themes real quickly and then want to hear from you all what get your impressions of everything and see. Well, actually, as Rachel's pulling that up, quick question. There it is. So as we're pulling this up, what were your initial thoughts or perspectives? Were there, and again, we will get into specifics in a moment, but what were your initial thoughts or perspectives? Keith?
No, I raised my hand just to ask a procedural question on how you wanted us to interact. Do we want to formally raise hands or just jump in? How do you see this going?
Typically just jump in. However, if you all have a culture of raising hands, we can do that. So
no, you're leading the meeting. I just wanted to make sure we had that set out there. So I have nothing to share at the moment other than that.
I was also in a training yesterday that we use chat to share thoughts. So if you're not able to share your thoughts out loud and just kind of saying it out loud, you can put it in the chat as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So any initial thoughts or reactions to what you read before we kind of start walking through the themes? All right.
Just before you jump in, the only question I had, Chris, if you could just recap a little bit on how you put the stakeholder meetings together. In other words, what was the genesis of it? How did you select who it was? I think that might help adding context to the quotes.
Yes. So when we met late last year with this group, we brainstormed the strategic questions, which Rachel has on the screen for us here, the strategic questions that we wanted kind of strategic planning to help us answer. And then after we kind of talked through those things, then we started to brainstorm, well, who do we need to talk to? Who do we want to hear from to help us answer that? And so using a mixture of one-on-one interviews and focus groups, and then along with the retreat from this body, we talked to just about approximately 28 people, and the names of the specific attendees of the focus groups and the informational interviews are at the end of the document. And so these were people that we talked to residents, we talked to economic development staff, we talked to some planning staff, we talked to people from UVA, we talked to a variety of people throughout the community, and that's where we got the input. And then based on those conversations, there were 5 themes we heard. And again, we heard lots of different information, but the 5 things that kept coming up over and over is there is a desire for a clear regional picture of affordable housing. Not just how does our locality fit in, but what does the broad region look like? And then secondly, some agreed upon and consistent barriers in housing. So it was really interesting, and Rachel and I were commenting on this, is every conversation we had, no matter who we talked to, we heard the same 5 barriers come up with varying degrees of which one was in their first top 3 or whatever. But there were very consistent barriers across stakeholder group, across sector. It was fascinating. Then there was the third theme is the regional challenge of regional differences. This is where because you have a region that encompasses rural, urban, and suburban, and the localities have some mixture of some of all of those, there's just this tension to manage in terms of how do you engage. And so there's a challenge there, and just perspectives in terms of needs, in terms of land use and structure, all of that. Then the 4th thing we heard was that people enjoy and appreciate the conversation, and they want to see action. And so they're really looking for action, something. Now, they're not saying that you have to do specific concrete action like in the weeds, but to say what is happening as a region, how are we addressing this, and they want to see something take shape. And then lastly, an opportunity to clarify your role. There's opportunity, we heard from a lot of people that they either knew of you, they knew that you were connected to the Planning District Commission, but they weren't sure what the relationship was, and they didn't quite know, or some of them had never heard of you, but they like the idea of a regional approach. So there's opportunities for you to really hone and clarify that role, and strategic planning can be the perfect opportunity, the perfect way to do that in terms of as you start to radiate out a plan into the community that really solidify, this is who we are, this is why we exist, and this is the impact we're making through this process. So those were the 4 themes. Any questions on those themes? And while I don't mind silence, sometimes I try to interpret the silence as in, it's all very clear, we don't have questions, or yeah, we knew this already. Help me interpret your thoughts.
Well, I'll say that I think these themes are validating for the existence of what we're doing. So I think that's a positive. It shows a need for the RHP.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anthony.
I would also add that within these themes and within some of the narrative that you all wrote, that I think there's clear general support for a regional approach. You know, you don't see a lot of comments in here about, we're not really certain that this is appropriate for a regional body to be taking on. So I feel like it definitely not only validates the work, but it shows that there is a desire and a support for the work and the direction that we're trying to move.
Yes, absolutely. And I think which goes nicely, well, I'll wait to jump to the pathways, but yes, I think that leads nicely to the pathways in terms of what people desire for that regional approach to be. But absolutely, nobody questioned whether there should be a regional approach. Many were like, you know, good luck with that, because you've got all these different localities, have all these different wants and needs, but nobody questioned it.
I think it also validates what we've been saying, right? It's always good to hear somebody outside of our circle echo what we've been saying inside the circle. So that was my takeaway from that.
Okay. Was there anything in the data, whether it's the themes or any of the quotes that you read, that was either unclear or seemed like that wrong? Okay. Was there anything that surprised you about any of this? From what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's more validation than it is surprise. Any surprises in there for you?
I don't know if I'd call it a surprise, but I definitely heard in some of the comments the same.
You got me.
Sorry, it accidentally muted. The same tension that I think the partnership itself has grappled with is the difference between influence and action, and what a regional advisory body can do versus what they can influence the local governments or stakeholders to do. So I felt some of that tension in some of these comments.
I think the affordability is a picture of that too, because the need, I mean, this one that we're even on right now, the need for like a regional picture of affordable housing is going to be necessarily different. And yet there is also a need for this idea to be kind of consolidated. So there's a tension there for a regional body to solve, to support this, specific location solutions essentially, and regional solutions too. So yeah, there's definitely an interesting challenge there that was, I think, highlighted through looking through some of these. And the other part of that too is the many conversations, not enough action. I think also speaks to that for the RHP of being currently at least like an advocacy body. We want to support the local jurisdictions and making action, but ultimately, at least in this particular setup of the RHP, we're not a builder, we're not a funder yet, although that's kind of an interesting idea to move towards. But yeah, that kind of came to fruition too, as these interesting, I think we've seen those same problems, so it's interesting to see them reflected.
Christine will echo this. I think one of the first things in my mind when we created the RHP, was it over 3 years ago? Christine, how long ago was that? 3 years. One of the things I wanted to throw out there and tackle was the definition, right? And I've noticed that came up in a couple of conversations, and I don't know if now is the time to tackle that, but there seems to be a hunger out there in the community, in the region, to maybe tackle that. I think we've been staying away from it for whatever reason, and I'm not so sure it's time for us to revisit that. That was what jumped off at the page to me in reading through it. But a lot of it seems to be a lot of what we've been talking internally and heard it before. But I don't know, that was something, just if we're sharing, that was something that jumped off the page for me.
I thought it was interesting that I think there were some groups who were pointing out that the people who are struggling to find quality housing don't look the way that you would think when it comes to subsidy. And so what I heard often about this clear picture is also just helping decision makers, the people who are the funders and decision makers, know it's not just low income people who are having this issue of affordability, and trying to flesh that out so that they're understanding what's really happening around housing, and who all is really being affected by it. I know I was a little enlightened to understand what's really happening in the housing arena, and why this bubble is happening, and why people can't find affordable housing, and who it's affecting. So I think some of that is just, in some of the definition, it might just be to show what does it look like? What does it look like if housing is unaffordable, and who does that affect too?
So I've changed my language about 2 or 3 months ago. I actually don't use the term affordable housing anymore. I'm using housing affordability, because it means different things to different people. I was trying to wrestle with, words matter. I was trying to wrestle, how do we have a conversation with somebody? Because, there's affordability at different price ranges, right? This market isn't such a place. I can speak to that as a practitioner. You know, again, please don't be shocked by the number, but you know, I have $1 million clients who can't find anything to afford because they can't afford over $1 million. I know that sounds weird, but that struggle is there just as well as the $100,000 home. So I've changed my terminology to housing affordability instead of affordable housing. Don't know if that's a simple fix or not, but in my vernacular, in the way I think, that's how I've changed that conversation.
And that was something that came up, you know, in our conversations across the conversations, the sense of like, it's there. I mean, again, don't want to shy away from the sense of housing that is affordable to people on the lower income spectrum, but it is truly a quality house. It's a housing issue because it's a systems issue. And to just call it affordable housing doesn't address the whole spectrum of some of the challenges within the systems of housing that exist. And so I think, yeah, finding ways to talk about it and to use language to talk about it so that it makes it feel less scary to some people, because as we mentioned in one of the themes, NIMBYism exists. And so when you use the words affordable housing, that generates all kinds of stereotypes and all kinds of themes for people that may or may not be accurate. And so find different ways to talk about it that help get away from the stereotypes, but they can really address the issue at hand.
One thing that I noticed in this that we all, you know, I think we've already been having conversations within the PDC about, oh, let me turn my camera on, sorry, is the, you know, the critical intersection of housing and transportation as to really, you know, critical regional goals that while they have different sort of paths that we're taking, you know, obviously we have our sort of, I kind of think of the Regional Transit Partnership as sort of like a mirror image in a lot of ways of what the RHP does. I mean, it's obviously very different in terms of the governance structure and the history, but you know, if we're advocating for places for people to live, we also at the same time have to advocate for places for people to work, places for people to go, how to get to work, how to get to, you know, recreation. It's all tied together. And when I was reading this, I think that that's something that, you know, we'll have to think about tackling, because, you know, even transportation obviously looks very different in rural areas than it does in urban areas, but ultimately, you know, it's something that we have to, I think, address as, you know, as a component of an affordable housing plan, or any sort of, you know, discussion of affordable housing has to include that. And I think that's something that I didn't realize really until I really started working at the PDC, how closely related those two things are. So it was interesting to see that in some of the respondents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are two thoughts on that. One is there are lots of regional bodies working in that region, and they don't all have the same localities. So they don't all, which is interesting to me, that like they don't all have the same 5 or 6 groups. They're different pockets, but they deal with different sectors: health, education, transportation, economic development. It is really interesting to learn about that a little bit. The other thing was interesting, and it was one of our conversations. They talked about and I don't know if it was through the Planning District Commission around the Blacksburg area, but they have a regional approach, but just it's community development. So they're looking at the whole community, and transportation and housing are two kind of pillars of that whole thing. And that was interesting to see their regional approach. To your point, Ian, is that they're not in silos. They all impact each other, and you can't address one without working on the other as well. And so regardless of how you all choose to address that in your region, I think it's important to think about that we do have to have all these sectors kind of rowing the boat together, so we're moving forward in the same direction.
I think that also bounces off of why there's many conversations happening, is the conversations are also happening in silos within those, you know, this region body is talking about it, and this region body, but there's not that coming together to talk about it as well.
So that brings up something that's been in my mind for a while, and I think we've talked about this numerous times. Is it time to start adding more entities and/or folks to this body, such as somebody from the Transit Authority, or somebody from health? We have health, excuse me, somebody from education to that, or is it time for us to grow it? I mean, historically, when we started it, we didn't really know what it was going to be, right? And we didn't want to become unruly maybe that's the wrong choice of words. We didn't want it to come in such a size that our executive director couldn't handle it, right? Or we couldn't handle it, staff couldn't handle it. Is this telling us that it's time for us to grow this entity a little bit, or am I thinking about it the wrong way?
I think that's a path. I think I think the key is figuring out how do we make sure that those sectors and those voices are included in whatever regional approach you all take. That would be one path, is to make sure that we've got representation from each of those areas. I think that, anyway, that's just my initial thought.
Reels, comma.
Hey, Gret, yep, there she goes.
Okay.
I think in the specific to this section that you have up on the screen, the challenge of regional differences, you know, as a regional body, this is not uncommon for us to have to grapple with how we support all 6 of our jurisdictions, because the member governments are who we serve. You know, they are our constituents, if you will. And so meeting our local governments, not just where they are, because that sounds a little bit patronizing, but working with our local governments and their priorities to help advance affordable housing or transit or economic development or any number of different things. It's really common for us to have this dissimilarity between what urban needs and wants and what rural needs and wants, while also knowing very well there's huge overlaps between the needs in the urban and rural communities. It's the strategies that you use that are different to address them. So this section in particular, to me, I found myself nodding my head a lot, because some of these statements, you could have replaced housing with many of our other programs and still felt that, like, yes, it is really challenging for a regional body to meet everybody's needs and push things in a certain direction without necessarily going to our local governments and suggesting we know better than them, which we know we don't. That's not what we're here for.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
I think, oh, go ahead.
Certainly one size doesn't fit all, for sure. Urban is different than suburban, it's different than rural. A lot of our 6 jurisdictions have some of each. So you've got that dynamic going on. And I think that as a regional body addressing those, I think those are 3 good categories that each have perhaps different issues and different solutions. Then you overlay the political perspective on each of the 6 jurisdictions, which varies quite a bit between we don't want anything to do with those kind of people to we've got to help these kind of people. I mean, that's the broad range of the 6 jurisdictions, I think. So you've got that overlay. I really like Keith's shift from affordable housing to housing affordability, because I feel that the reason nobody has a common definition of affordable is we all come at it from different perspectives. We all focus on different rungs of the ladder. And there are several rungs of the ladder that are in the affordable range, from homelessness on up to home ownership. And so I think that any solution needs to acknowledge that affordability will look different at each one of those rungs, and each one of those rungs are crucial to the overall housing health of our community. And the fact that there's a shortage, I think this is fair to say, on every single rung, from luxury housing on down, makes each rung below it, or those rungs below, whichever rung you're focused on, all the more challenging because of the downward pressure from the shortage above. So you've got all of those dynamics. You've got different tiers, you've got different contexts, suburban, rural, and you've got the different political areas, which I'm not sure how you address that other than just to be an objective unifying effort to positively influence all 6 jurisdictions to understand that it is in their best interest to be interested in addressing this problem.
Yeah.
And I think to add on to what Greg said, and you did such a beautiful job with that mental illustration of downward pressure. I think as we recognize the downward pressure, that the pressure below the folks who are at that 0 to 30% AMI is different than the pressure that is when you're talking about 80%. And for that reason, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for this group to have influence for the folks who have that 0 to 30% AMI. Earlier, I've been doing a lot of listening, engaging and all that good stuff. And I love this idea of being an influencer in the area. And I'm interested to see where the coalition, where this group goes in that direction.
As you all kind of, I like that image of the rungs. One of the images that one of the stakeholders used when we were talking about them was like a barbell effect. Joey, to your point, the 0 to 30, there's a crunch there because there's not a lot of housing, not a lot of opportunity availability there at the 0 to 30 range. And likewise, at the other end of the range, there's not a lot, as Keith was saying about the kind of the $1 million home market. And so that squeezes the middle because trying to figure out how we get people either further up the rung or come down the rung. And so it really squeezes that middle, which was an interesting, I never heard that. I don't know if that resonates with you all or not. I thought that was an interesting
Well, it squeezes the middle, but those middle rungs have shortages too.
Absolutely. Excellent. Yeah. Yes.
So what was moderate housing in home ownership is now being gobbled up by people that could afford something more if something more luxurious were out there. And it just trickles all the way down to workforce housing and so on.
Yeah.
So I just, the conversation is great, and Christine was focusing on local governments. I just want to remind everybody, we have other entities that are part of this, and you know, the pillars all have to be of the same height and strength for this to happen. And I'm referencing the nonprofits, the for-profits, and the people we serve, and UVA in part of it. And this conversation is very timely. As those who know, I also chair the Piedmont Community Land Trust. And as I'm sitting here, I've got 2 purchases falling apart that were at the 50% AMI because interest rates have gone up so much that their debt to income doesn't work. And we're struggling and trying to figure out a way to keep these buyers in the deal, which at this point looks like we got to find $75,000 a home extra to make that happen. So this is an extremely complex, moving topic. By the time we finish this meeting, something else is probably going to pop up. But it's, I think when we created this, the essence of this was to have everybody at the table from the 4 sectors or 5 sectors with UVA at the table. So I just want to make sure that it's great to talk about the local governments. We love them. But we need to have equal time and equal conversation with the nonprofits in particular, the providers at certain levels on that end of it. So I just want to make sure we keep everybody's focus on that.
Well, I think that, and thank you, Keith, that's helpful. I think that part of that too is everybody recognized the Planning District Commission's neutral role as the body to help bring all those voices together. To be able to start to create that regional vision and to really drive that regional definition and have a regional approach. And again, it's managing that tension, back to kind of what Christine was saying, managing the tension between a regional approach and the individual localities or jurisdictions' wants, needs, hopes, dreams, and how to manage the both and. And I think some of that is and again, this is where the influencer part comes in, is to be the influencer to a yes and or a both and kind of solution and approach as opposed to a zero sum. I think some of what we heard is there's a fear of the zero sum, like if they win, then we lose. And so it's to kind of shift the conversation to no, we all win. The community wins, the region wins when we're able to make sure that everybody has access to quality housing that they can afford. And from an economic perspective, from a transportation perspective, from a community well-being perspective, from a lens of determinants of health, all of that. And so that's part of the challenge, is to make it, again, it sounds kind of like a utopian dream. And I think there's also opportunity to push the community further in that direction.
I wanted to just,
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
oh yeah, sorry, Ian. I think what you were brought up, Keith, is really crucial because and maybe this is because I've been chairing the strategies committee, where we've primarily focused on local government, policies. It does seem to me that right now, at least, there is that's where most of the potential, I think, for change lies. But maybe that's wrong thinking, because so much is focused on zoning and land use maps that affect affordability, as far as I can tell, and placement of housing and geography. That seems to be our focus now. But I am curious, like, okay, yeah, what does it mean for us to be the same kind of voice for the private sector or the nonprofit sector? It's so much of what I have been thinking about is just like really been local government focused and like, either local or state funds to support housing focus. And like, so I don't know, I just wanted to mention that it feels like that's been our focus. And I think for the right reason, but I don't know, I'm just really curious what that looks like for us to focus on the other pillars.
One thing I love about our organization is that we have not-for-profits that really focus on each of the rungs. And so I think that brings to the overall group perspective. We have FAR, right, looking at public housing. We have Anthony's group looking at homelessness. And we have Piedmont looking at rentals with different levels of subsidy. We have Habitat focused on home ownership. So that's one of the real strengths of the group, is that I think we've got each of the rungs covered in the not-for-profit sector, which is a real asset. It seems to me that, and every spring when we all chase the same small pot of money to try to find ways to subsidize new projects, that in the end it comes down to you need dirt, you need a site, and you need money to subsidize. And the dirt is somewhat controlled, certainly by the market, but more importantly by zoning. But there's this magic series of pots of monies that we have to reach out beyond the region to pull that money into the region to subsidize new projects or renovation projects, whatever. And as a regional body, in the end, how do we bring more money to bring more subsidies to build more houses? It really comes down, to be crude, I think, to how do we get more outside money to help build more houses? Is that an oversimplification?
That's pretty, I think that's what we've heard a lot too, is it's not understanding the true cost of what it takes to build the housing. And I think that probably one of the reasons that people say government is because a lot of times those are who visibly are showing barriers, whether it's through the zoning or lack of investment through subsidy and these rules and putting all of these around. I think somebody shared a story about there was somebody who was willing to put the money down and build these things, but then they couldn't because the process was too long and it wasn't worth it. And so there are things, I think at the end of the day, it always comes back to, we have to think about all of them. As you guys are saying, we have to consider all of the pillars and how to influence all of them. Yeah.
So I'm going to jump in here and to give an example showing why and how the 4 pillars can actually work. And Greg, play off of your comment a little bit, and this is going to come from a land trust perspective. We just closed our 9th home at Spring Hill Village. It cost us only $180,000 to put 9 of 50% AMI buyers into it. And the way it worked was like, if Ned is still on, I needed to sit down with Ned. We needed to get an interpretation of the proper from Albemarle County. We didn't get any money from them, but I needed a certain interpretation, which they did. I needed to make a relationship with Stanley Martin. It was bringing between $40,000 to $60,000 to the table to make it happen. Keep in mind, they're working with the profit. The second part of it was the land trust. We needed to put it together. We needed to bring in roughly $20,000 to it. So we, for $20,000 per unit, moved in 50% AMI families on homes that are going to be forever affordable. That $20,000 is constantly going to give back for years to come, all the way down. So I take a little exception to, you need a lot of money to do this. That is not, I don't believe that's the case. What you need is to put the right people at the table, the right silos at the table, all pulling on the same oars. And that was my whole goal when I originally made the motion to create the RHP, to put that together. So yes, money's good, right? But I didn't need money. We didn't need money from Albemarle County. What I needed them to do was help us interpret something to the way that it helped us, so that we can do that. Instead of having 9 houses go to market rate and nobody won on that end of it. So relationships matter in this business, and not so much money, Greg. And I appreciate your
Well,
approach.
I didn't say a lot of money. I think you just proved my point. You said that
Oh.
$20,000 of third-party money helped 9 families have a new home.
Created $2.2 million.
Creative financing, right?
Created $2.2 million.
Exactly, but seed money matters. Could we as a region get access to seed money and create examples of how to be creative with that seed money to create more housing?
So I raised that money by knocking on people's doors and said, give me money.
I think.
So if I come knocking on your door, run away.
I think the other area where subsidy came in was not so much in home ownership, but in rental, high density rental. And so I think it's again, that whole range of tools in your toolbox to be able to meet people in their current context and situation to help them find that housing. So I think that whether it's, you know, the money to help people get take advantage of the land trusts, homes, or the high density and all across the spectrum, but having access to that. And I think that is an area where people want it. And again, it's easy to say, well, I want them to go find the money for me to be able to use, but that could be an opportunity that might be, I'm not saying it has to be, that could be something that that a regional housing partnership would help point people to those relationships or to those sources. Again, you're not going to find the money for them, because I think the challenge for you all is to take action, but the action is not direct service action per se. The action is kind of herding all the cats and keeping us all in a bigger picture perspective, because you do have all the players at the table who are primed and ready, who are actually structured and set up to do that direct action. So anyway, so I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's something crucial for us to think about. I think a lot about the Premier Circle project as being an interesting example of, like, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying, Keith, and I mean, I'm totally there with it. I guess I don't, that wasn't like an RHP initiative, right? It kind of came out because we had relationships, and I think that bolstered the project moving forward, which is a big positive of this group. I just think it's interesting to think about how could RHP actually maybe be more specifically targeted towards facilitating conversations among developers or nonprofits to say, hey, there's this opportunity. How can we not compete, or how can we help you not compete? Because I'm just even looking over like just notes from different competition, different opportunities for funding, and it's like, everyone's tired of competing, being in that mindset. And I think the RHP might be a great vehicle to actually specifically target opportunities to reduce competition and bigger thinking among those partners. Is just one of the ideas that kind of came to mind, instead of it kind of happening because of informal, which is really great, informal kind of relationship building. But maybe there could be opportunities for us to formally say, let's help you strategize. How do we tackle these opportunities that we have?
Relationships and trust matter. And that was what got Premier Circle across the line. I just used the land trust as an example because it's fresh in my mind. But with Premier Circle, you may have been able to get that through Anthony, but the relationship that you established here with Ned, and Ned being part of it, and if Ned was on it, he would repeat this regularly. He gets a chance to communicate to his board members and saying, look, this is a good thing. I believe that that project got expedited because of this relationship. We may not have had a direct connection to it, but we sure as heck were in the background doing that direct connect.
Yeah, completely agree.
So if there are no other comments on the themes or in quotes, I'd like to go down to the pathways and talk through those a little bit. Because pathways for each project, each client, they emerge differently. Here, I think that there was a flow to the pathways that you all had, and there were 4. And so I think the first is the pathway that we saw for you all was that a shared unified regional vision for affordable housing. That if the regional housing partnership comes and says, because we've got everybody at the table, because we can generate this vision for what it looks like, not telling people how they have to do it, not creating these hard and fast rules, but say this is what affordability looks like. Housing affordability looks like for our region, and this is why it matters and is important. And then to use that vision as an influence to guide people. Your advocacy is no longer on like this zoning or that zoning or this, it's on to this vision. And if we keep true to the vision, we're advocating towards the vision, which then drives policy and helps inform and shape the localities and how they do policy, which then filters down to giving the localities tools for their toolboxes, case studies, sharing ideas, again, access to like, hey, there are these funding opportunities available. If we had the right group of people on here, then we can have, that could jump on this opportunity and again, generating all towards this regional vision. So it feels very much like that's the flow and the role that the regional housing partnership could play in the region, and that the stakeholders are thirsting for in terms of having tools. Because even when we worked a few years ago with the land trust, again, when we talk to people in localities, they're like, we just want tools for our toolbox. We just need something. And so for case studies to see to some creative, innovative solutions that maybe they haven't thought of, and to be that resource partner that then again points to a broader vision, people were very much desiring that. Responses, reactions, thoughts, questions, concerns on the pathways.
I do want to take a moment. I want to personally thank Stacy for helping us out at Riverside Village, because without her, this would not have happened. So thank you very much. I wanted to get that out before I forgot.
Okay, great, thank you.
Well, I'll make a comment about the first one. So, it says without a clear unified vision, all the localities and groups will create their vision of what they think things should look like, or not give it the attention it deserves. I'm not sure I understand what's in the parentheses. But a regional approach to housing affordability doesn't mean that all the localities have to look or do things the same way.
Yes, exactly.
I don't expect the other counties to want to do or look the way Albemarle County does. Albemarle County's got a very specific vision of how we want our county to look. And we get criticized because our process is long. And I saw green space and want things to look a very specific way. Well, yeah, we do. That's right. But we're not saying that has to be how the other localities do it. So the RHP should be there as, like somebody mentioned, it being a data clearinghouse or helping to build relationships, but it's in support of each locality's vision or strategic plan, and housing affordability fits in there somewhere. When you look at Albemarle's strategic plan, affordable housing and housing affordability is one of 10 or 13 priorities. So how does the RHP help that locality achieve that in the regional, how Nelson County or how Louisa County thinks about housing in their county helps us in how we think about our rural areas. How the city thinks about affordable housing helps us in our urban ring area. So I don't want folks to think like we're trying to do a regional approach so that the look or the feel or the impacts are all the same. That's left up to each locality to decide. But the RHP can go a step further in maybe being that consultant or that coach as the localities go through their affordable housing issues. For example, Premier Circle was thrown out. Heath mentioned the project, but anytime we get a rezoning that comes forward, it's nice for me to hear from for-profits in this arena, because eventually it comes down to their bottom line. But I've never really seen a spreadsheet that says why 3 extra months makes it not tenable for them as a project, why an extra 5% in affordable units makes it not tenable for the bottom line. So if you had a partnership that was willing to take on that kind of analysis, if you would, or somebody that said, well, here it is, here's the spreadsheet, and when you require 60% AMI in your rental units, this is what is thrown out of whack on the balance sheet, given the costs of land, et cetera, et cetera. So who becomes that interpreter? Because it always seems like, well, you've got the developer and they're going against the locality, and the neighborhoods are going against both. And well, who's the one to sit there and go, all right, maybe we referee a little bit on these different sides so that everybody has the same information out there. Because folks that live, regardless of where you live, regardless of the affordability of that unit, everybody should deserve a quality of life just like everybody else. So infrastructure needs to be there, green space needs to be there, it should be environmentally safe and sound. I mean, all of the above, right? So the standards are not going to lower just because it's affordable housing. But I think what localities have a hard time understanding is, from the developer standpoint, well, why doesn't this pencil? Help me figure out, if incentives or subsidies or whatever is going to come out, what can be most impactful to help those type of projects pencil out. And the RHP could be the one doing those case studies or those things. So it doesn't, it's not just Greg trying to pad his own project or whatever. It's more detached than that. If any of those words make sense.
No, that's helpful. And I think you're right. This is not saying that the RHP needs to be responsible for telling each locality how to do affordable housing. It's creating that broader vision that then each locality then figures out to their own goals and their own desires and wants. So it's not a regional top-down approach. It's like, everybody wants and deserves a quality, affordable community in which to live. And this is what we're trying to help people live into. And Albemarle is going to look different than Green, is going to look different than Louisa. And then that resourcing of helping things go right by supporting and resourcing with case studies and all those other things is absolutely the role I think the housing partnership plays in helping the locality live in that broader vision that still meets their needs, goals.
I think the vision is also to help people understand their role in the housing system. So we're grappling with how does transportation fit in, and what is their role to helping the housing system. And this vision would be a way to help understand how all of these things intersect as well.
I think the word unified is a problem here. It leads to, and Ned commented, I mentioned earlier, one size does not fit all. You've got 3 different contexts, right? Suburban, rural, and you've got 6 different jurisdictions. A shared regional vision, I think the word unified implies a sameness. It implies one size fits all to me. And
Okay.
just in that one word.
Gotcha. That was not the intent of that word, but thank you because as Keith said earlier, words do matter. And so that was not the intent of using that word. So thank you for that clarity.
I'm just going to jump in. I know this is something that I think sort of dovetails with a conversation that I think this committee will be having later in the spring about funding for the RHP and what exactly that looks like in terms of localities and other partners. But in terms of the value proposition that the RHP offers, here at the TJPDC, I think if the committee and the RHP decides for this to be, one of the roles that the RHP plays is providing the tools for localities, it seems to me that the toolbox, so to speak, is there are multiple boxes that we can supply if the funding is there. And I know that that's obviously top of mind for, us here at the TJPDC, but in terms of finding, grant opportunities or helping, basically serving as some sort of, housing consultant to, I know we were sort of just talking about the overemphasis perhaps on local government, but that this to me really is coming, and I'm still very new, obviously, to I wasn't here in the inception of the RHP, but it seems like this conversation is really coinciding with an important conversation about what the capacity of the RHP is. And I think that it'll be fruitful for those to be discussed at the same moment.
So to play off of that a little bit, Ian, thank you for sharing. That's part of the reason why we wanted to tackle this new strategic plan before we tackle the budget and the numbers, so on, so we can start taking a look at that from a more holistic perspective. But you mentioned the word toolbox, and you mentioned the word toolbox for the local governments. But FAR needs a toolbox. Anthony needs a toolbox. Greg needs a toolbox, right? So there's different toolboxes that help that, because Anthony should have a toolbox that he can pull out to help from his perspective, from his nonprofit perspective on the end of it. Greg from the for-profit perspective. Colette and her team's about ready to embark on a pretty ambitious affordable housing program. Is there a toolbox designed for them? So I'm just going to keep on rallying back. I know local governments is very important to this, but we need to keep in front of mind the rest of the body. So if I sound like I'm repeating myself, I am intentionally. I just want to make sure that stays in front of everybody's mind.
It's called priming. It's important so that it stays in the front of our minds, and you think about it throughout the process. So repeat yourself. That's okay. Well,
I actually have attention deficit syndrome, so I probably forgot what I talked about already. It just popped in my head. But anyway, then there's that.
And along with that toolbox, I think that something else as part of that resourcing is and we haven't mentioned it here, although it was mentioned in the report, and then again here in the pathways, the real-time data. Lots of stakeholders kind of talk about the sense of real-time data, like to be able to say, like, well, how many units do we think we need at certain levels along those rungs, so that we're not overemphasizing one area, and again recognizing it's going to change as new units come on, and just as the world changes around us. And so that was something that they wanted to, that multiple groups said would be really helpful, and it's an opportunity again to resource along those. Part of the toolbox is the resourcing of data to make sure that people can help them make good data informed decisions around the needs, again, in the region, but also even by locality perhaps too. And you have some of that really interesting drill down data in your snapshot, in your regional housing snapshot you have on the website. So this would almost be like some kind of real-time version of that. Okay.
So there's a couple of folks we haven't heard from yet. Market being one, Colette being the other. Did I miss anybody else? If you guys have anything to share, that would be great.
Okay. Stop sharing. All right. So from here, the question and the conversation is what of this information do the membership, do you want them to have as part of that retreat coming up next month? So do they see the whole report? Is it as an executive summary of this? And then ultimately, what do we need from the membership? What conversations do we need to have with the membership? What kind of data do we need to get from the membership in order to help move forward to create that strategic plan? We've certainly got some ideas, but I want to hear from you all as the executive committee. Like, what do you feel like the membership needs, and what do you want to hear from them?
I would default to Christine, but I know that I like reading strategic plan and reports and things that come from different places. So I would be inclined to publish this at some point. And when I say publish, I don't mean that with a capital P. I mean, just keeping the public, just keeping the public abreast of what's going on.
There's some very busy people in that group. I think a condensed or an executive summary would be useful. 22 pages, frankly, might discourage busy people.
I think you could put the quotes in maybe an appendix or something like that, if people didn't want to read all the actual commentary that individuals in the interviews made, but could focus, like Greg says, if they only have time to focus on the key parts of the report, then those could be all in the front versus the other stuff in the back. Maybe they wouldn't get discouraged by the 22 pages then. 22 pages isn't all that long, but
Use a lot of spaces too.
Christine, you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
No, it was actually, I agree with both Shelby and Colette. I think condensing y'all's narrative and the summary information and the themes all into one place, but I think it's also it was really valuable to me to read specific comments, you know, to hear it in the voice of the people that said it versus an interpretation of it. And so I think providing both of them to the partnership would be really valuable. I know if I wasn't involved in the executive committee part and I was moving on to do work as the full partnership and not having, you know, the luxury of being able to digest all of this, it might inform how I participate in that workshop.
will we kind of structure a bit that bigger meeting with the full body, you know, in terms of, okay, here's the report, read it. What are we going to actually do in that meeting? And what questions do we want them to think about ahead of time?
Right, and that's yes, that was kind of my question to you all, is to like, what did you feel like you need, what conversations do you feel like you need to have with the members on that day to get what you need to form the strategic plan? Like we can tease out, we've got exercises we can use, but I feel like this is because it's the members we're having conversation with. I don't know that we spend a ton of time on the report. It's more of them having that for context. I feel like we want to get the biggest bang for the buck, having those folks around the table or so to speak in the space to be able to leverage their wisdom and experience and expertise and knowledge to really tease out ideas for how to move forward.
What about if it's just focused on those main takeaways that you highlighted, and it's just kind of making sure people understand what that means in context for their RHP? Because I think that might help lead then the discussion about, okay, how do we then accomplish those particular things that were highlighted from the community about, you know, what's needed. I mean, I guess there's also sometimes a difference between what the community sees and also what we then focus on, let's say. But maybe, I don't know, that's just as an offer of kind of condensing it, because I agree with Colette, like that we need to be really specific about what we were trying to get out of this discussion. Otherwise it will just be a nice conversation, but it won't really lead us anywhere.
But there aren't any real action steps, right? Is that what we're trying to solicit from the members then? I mean, this is a broad, you know, here are the themes, this is what we heard. This is what maybe the stakeholders feel they need, but there aren't any action or strategies outlined as yet to tell us where we should go next. I guess that's what you're saying, right? So is that what we are looking for from the members?
Yes, it's to see where they, given the information, where do they want the partnership to go next? Like what do they, are those four kind of pathways, are those the right things? And so let's focus energy on those four things and move forward, and then we can build out strategy under that. Or is it, no, that's the wrong stuff, we only want to be a toolbox and focus on resourcing, and so let's double down that. And again, there's no right or wrong in this. It's just really, you know, what is the partnership feel is realistically the right vision for the next 3 to 5 years and the path that you all want to run on.
Yeah, I think there's a danger in a small organization like ours with a lot of volunteers that are very busy about taking on too much. So, you know, I would advocate for trying to get the members to focus on, you know, 2 or 3 really important things that will make a difference. And you know, develop action steps or whatever to move those forward.
Yeah, Colette, I was
Really great.
thinking between 3 to 6 bullet points of what we're trying to accomplish on that end of it and let the body speak. I will add a little bit to this back on the comment of everybody's busy because everybody is. We've just instituted something over at the Charlottesville Association Realtors Board level, which I found to be very helpful. What the executive team, which is this body, is actually reaching out by phone. We divvied up the rest of the members to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, have you read the report? You know, so a lot of folks maybe don't read it until the meeting shows up. So I think this one is super important. It might be in our best interest to divvy up the number of folks and pick it up, make sure they received the package, that read it. If they have any questions, please ask staff or anything like that. I'm prepared to do that. I think that will make the meeting more useful instead of folks reading it for the first time at the meeting. I don't know how anybody feels about that, but I toss that out as an idea.
We can hold time for questions. So, you know, just as we gave you guys time to ask questions and receive clarity, we can have a short time in the retreat as well. So I'm hearing read ahead. You guys are going to set the expectation to read ahead. We'll have a short time to think about, you know, for them to respond and ask questions about what they've read.
So I'm going to volunteer myself as the chair to call everybody because I want to make sure everybody reads the darn report. So it makes best use of our time. We're spending a substantial amount of money with Spark Mill, and I want to make sure everybody reads it and understands it. So Ian, tackle me with phone numbers and we'll get this done.
And then what I'm kind of hearing is the consensus is that really to get the body, the membership to like say, okay, all the things we could do, given the busy and limited time, money, resources, where's the focus? Where do we feel like we have the greatest impact given all of that? And to really get them focused around that. So we can absolutely design an agenda that will give us that focus and clarity. And then there'll probably be a couple of versions of kind of winnowing down. So we'll start broad and continue to kind of filter so that by the end of the time with the regional, with the members, that there will be a sense of, okay, this clearly emerged as the thing that the housing partnership wants to focus on.
Is it?
I think it's important to get some things that the partnership can do that no other organization can do.
So I'm going to toss out an idea that I've been pushing around, land bank, for instance. Should this body take on the role of being the regional land bank? Is that the type of deliverable that you're talking about, Colette, or something similar to that?
Yeah, I don't know what it would be, but I'm just trying to think about, you know,
Sure.
we're an organization that brings a lot of different bodies together, and there should be some things that we can do in this space that others can't do. And we should focus on those things, I think.
And I was going to, in line with that, maybe suggest that one of the things we could do, and maybe at the beginning of it, was, you know, talk about what we want to try to accomplish during the session, but to actually narrow ourselves to some particular visions, we can have like a set of things that we value, and they could be kind of like checks to make sure that they're, you know, like, because like I think what Colette's saying is really important. Like, it's realistic. Like, we don't have staff yet, so maybe one of our visions is we work towards that. I don't know, but like, it's realistic, it's achievable. It isn't duplicative of another group in the community. Like, maybe we can kind of come prepared with some of the values that we would suggest, and if everyone says, okay, yeah, that's good, let's check our visions back to that. That might be a nice way of helping us get to those visions that are going to set us up for success based upon those kind of concerns that you talked about, Colette.
So I probably should know this, but how much runway do we have from today to that meeting? How much time?
Just about a month, almost exactly a month.
It feels like there should be another get together of this group prior to that. And it feels like to me, I don't know if staff and Spark Mill can take some of this stuff and whittle it down to these 3 to 6 bullet points, and then we can have a discussion about that before. Or is that something that the executive team can tackle with Spark Mill on that end of it. So we can make best use of our time. I just think it feels like to me from this presentation to that presentation, it seems like there's a lot of work yet to be done to come up with these bullet points, for lack of a better term.
Let me throw out a process suggestion, and then you can tell me if that works for you all, because I think that we can take the bulk of the work in that we can winnow down the report to the summary of the themes and pathways with quotes and kind of a little bit about the stakeholder interviews as kind of the addendum. So shift that around, get that ahead to you all fairly soon so you can share that out so people have plenty of time to review it. And then for the day of, I think that what we would do is we would craft an agenda. And if you want to talk through that ahead of time, we can certainly do that with you. But we would craft an agenda that kind of focuses on like, what's the main impact we want to have, you know, as a regional housing partnership, what is ours to own? There's lots of things we could do, but what is the thing that we can do that's not duplicative? And then what along with those, that vision, what are the values that we're going to use to drive that? And then what are some specific areas we want to work on? So I mean, again, it's a funnel. It gets progressively, by the end of the day, we have to have those concrete things. At this point, we're not making decisions. We're not asking anybody to sign up for anything. We're literally just tapping into the wisdom and experience and expertise around the table that then will come back and be the meat of the plan that then will be coming back to the membership with at later date, say April, May sometime, saying, okay, remember that conversation we had in March, we looked at the data, here's what we heard you say, this is how it fits into a plan, and then there's more conversation about the specifics and concrete nature of that plan. So right now we're still in kind of the data gathering, kind of brainstorming phase. Will that work? Do you think that will, or is that too slow? Like, how does that feel for you all?
So are you saying by the time we end this meeting next month, we do not have a clear path? We're having a
We will have
step.
a clearer path in terms of 3 to 5 overarching. These are the big rocks we're going to tackle and some ideas about what that looks like, but it won't be wrapped up with a bow on it. It'll just be
That could be an action plan.
Yeah, I would feel better, or just to speak this out loud, is that maybe with the full body give some direction back to this body, then we formalize it. I just don't want to wait another quarter to finalize the plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you're saying.
Yeah. No, we would take that information from the retreat immediately and turn that around into a rough draft that then this body would come back to and get to edit, revise, turn to make sure you think the language is right. So that would happen pretty quickly after the 23rd.
So we're going to be looking for a motion at that meeting to direct us to finalize it. I think that's an important part when you're crafting an agenda, unless somebody else thinks otherwise. I think that the full body has to give us the direction to do that. Or Christine, can we do that independently as the executive committee, or that we're going to need direction, formal direction from the larger body?
Before answering that question, can I ask a question? Would you then expect a final copy of it to go back to the partnership to adopt as its strategic plan? And that would occur in the June meeting. But you'd be asking the full partnership to direct the executive committee to get it to that final plan to bring it before the body for approval.
Thank you for adding clarity to it. That's exactly what I was thinking. I didn't want to do this in the larger committee. I wanted to do this in our body with the direction from the larger body for final adoption by that, so that as of July 1, it is now enacted and it moves forward. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. All right, so then I guess last clarifying question is, we have this time set up on our calendars. I'm going to my calendars to make sure I'm speaking the truth. So I have 12, not saying this is the whole time for the retreat, but I have 12 to 5 blocked off on my calendar for the 23rd. What have you all communicated to the membership? What is the expectation around that time? I know when we talked in the past, there was the thought that we would have to be virtual. Is that still the thinking? If this has to be virtual, that's just going to change how we would facilitate the process, and it would not be that long. Obviously, the longest it would be 3 hours, just because after 3 hours, people start to melt virtually. So what does that day look like?
That, we sent it out as a virtual meeting from 2 to 5 on the 23rd.
Okay.
We want to consider in-person folks? We have the adequate space and
I would advocate for that if it's possible, but I know we're in a tricky zone.
how many people will we be?
19 voting members plus about 5 staff plus anybody that decides to join as public or stakeholders.
So we would need to find a space that we could.
Yeah, we couldn't
fit
use
that
the Water
many.
Street Center for that many.
Yeah. I don't know about UVA, but I know Carr has the Hillsdale Center, which is large enough to do that. We just had our 15-person board meeting and had everybody 6 feet apart. And it's not a public meeting, but it's open to the members. We generally don't get that many. I don't suspect we'll get a lot to this. We had like 4 or 5, but there was adequate spacing across from everybody, and it made a huge difference. It was our first in-person meeting like that in, God, nearly 2 years. And it was welcomed from my perspective. So I don't know how that looks. I mean, I can surely get a car. I'm sure would be more than happy to help us with the space, assuming it's available, unless somebody else has a more adequate space. Or we're still staying virtual. My personal opinion, I think this strategic plan is too important not to have this discussion as an in-person or virtual. Virtual is great, we'll all get used to it, but in-person is a whole different world. Any thoughts, anybody? From your perspective.
I mean,
Mark,
I agree. I think if there's the will to meet in person, I think we should do it. It's a little bit hard to tell with 19 people how they feel about that. I mean, it's kind of like can we get an effective threshold of people to an in-person meeting at this point? And if not, then we should still do Zoom, because I think having 8 people show up in person is probably not as good as having 19 people show up on Zoom for less time. So that would probably require some outreach on the part of staff to see the willingness quickly. But if there's willingness, I think in person is good. But I think that's just a question we have to.
what about a
figure out.
Google poll? Everybody sends out, they'd be willing to do this in person or not. Simple to set up. That's something Spark Mill can do for us.
And when is it scheduled for again? A month from now?
March 23rd. And so, Ian, I think I heard you correctly say right now, it's been sent out to the membership as did you say 2 to 5?
Yes.
On the 23rd? Okay, 2 to 5 on the 23rd, currently as a virtual thing. And so what I'm hearing you all say is it's probably good to poll people to see where we can get the greatest traction. If we would get more likely to get people virtually or more likely to get people in person. And so, yeah,
How does everybody feel about this in this executive committee? It seems like Ian's in favor and I'm in favor of it. Please chime in. Does in person, are you comfortable with that or you're not? If everybody could chime in, I'd appreciate it. Colette?
Yeah, I think if the space is big enough, that would be fine. But then does that extend it to 4 or 5 hours? If we're in person?
So selfishly, we would love to have 4 hours with you all. Just because in order to have the conversations, in order to really dig into the exercises, we make do them virtually with 3 hours just because that's the maximum amount of time we can really get people to focus. So again, I mean, you all know this group best. You know what they'll be willing to give and what they'll be willing to kind of engage in. We could make 3 hours in person work. Like I said, selfishly, we would love 4 hours.
Yeah, that 4 hours really equals 5 or more, right? The time to getting there, leaving. It's pretty much at that point, it's a whole day. I think that might be what Colette's thinking.
I know for me, I would be more inclined to spend 4 hours outside with everybody on this call, just because that, to me, that feels a little bit safer. I will also share that I'll be in Chicago the last week in March. So if I think it's the week before that, but if it's that last week in March, then I will be unable to attend in person.
Yeah, I think outside, I understand, but they're gonna need projectors and so forth and so on for that. But thank you.
Well, if we had the space, we could do outside. It's just getting the space for everyone and having a wall space to write on. I mean, and again, we can make it work if that was, if you could get enough people to do that. But yeah, you all tell us what you think would get the best traction.
Greg?
Socially distanced inside 3 hours.
Ned?
I mean, honestly, I'm fine either way.
I don't think that was one of the options, Greg.
Nice job, Ned.
See, honestly, I think
that.
that while I am a big supporter of in person for 4 hours, I don't know if it's realistic at this point to expect that of 21 people.
Got it.
I don't know. I mean, that's the feeling I'm getting. That's the feeling that I'm getting from at least this group.
Margaret?
It's a 2 hour, it's an hour drive in, hour drive out, so it makes it 8 hours or 6 hours depending on what. I really love the virtual ones because I get to see your cute little faces and I don't have to do that drive, but I will do whatever you guys want. As long as I don't have to drive with Jesse. I'm just joking about driving.
Thank you, Shelby, for sharing that. I agree also, 3 hours. So why don't we agree to do this? Why don't we send out, see if somebody can send out a poll. We're just asking, hey, 3 hours in person, how do you feel about that? And if we get like a socially distanced, so forth and so on, if we get this to hit the numbers we need to, great. If not, we'll just keep it virtual. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be
I mean,
happy to.
I think the most participation, like Anthony said earlier, is the key point here.
Got it. Perfect.
So I'll send that out tomorrow. I'll send it to the whole partnership. So if you all wouldn't mind voting in it, that'd be great.
All right. Fantastic. Great. Well, this has been really helpful. This has given us what we need to move forward with that day. It was helpful to be able to talk with you all and to talk through the report together. Are there any other questions that you all have or anything that you need that you haven't said that you've wanted to say yet as we've been in this conversation as we start to wrap up?
I thought it was fun reading the quotes because every time I was like, who the hell said that? I wanted to know who it was.
Yes.
I guess it's best you keep them anonymous.
That was what I was trying to get out of them, that I just couldn't make it happen.
And we did a good job.
It was just fun playing. Oh, I know who said that versus who said that.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time today and for the conversation and your engagement. This has been really great. And we'll look to hear back from Ian based on the findings of what you all, what the group decides. And we'll start working a plan and agenda for that. And we will see you all either virtually or in person on the 23rd.
Do you want to schedule the plan meeting?
Yes, so thank you, Rachel. Yes, we probably should, and thank you, Rachel, for that. We probably do want to get our next meeting, this group, on the calendar for where we would be bringing together the rough draft of the plan based on the membership meeting. And so that we want that at least 2 weeks after the 23rd of March, just because that gives us time to spend time working on that. And so I know that one of those weeks, the first week in April, is spring break for lots of families and school systems. So could we do something the week of April 11th to come back together? We would send out a version, much like we did this meeting. We'd send you a draft ahead of time for you to look at, think through, and mark up. And then we come together, and in that meeting, we would process it. We'd wordsmith a little bit together. We tweak, we change until to a draft you all feel good about. And so that we like to have about 90 minutes for that meeting. And that we're looking at the week of the 11th of April.
So Christine and Ian, I know we want to tackle the budget. We've kind of deferred that from this meeting. It looks like we're going to defer it probably in that meeting again. So we will probably have that budget conversation in May. Is that an adequate enough time, or is that a little bit too late?
My, one of the thoughts that I had is, would this 90-minute be in lieu of the regularly scheduled executive committee meeting, which is normally the fourth Wednesday of the month? If we can do this in addition to it, then we can carry on with a regular agenda that fourth Wednesday and make sure the budget conversation happens before May. Because I
So
think we're
you're-
going to need to put out, we're going to need the executive committee to advise on the asks that we're putting out to the other partners other than the local sector, and getting those requests out for people to put into their budgets. I know the private sector and a lot of folks don't run on a fiscal year, but we would like to have all of our funding asks and receipts coming at similar times. So I think pushing it off till May might be too late.
That's the reason I asked it. So you're asking us to meet twice in April.
If
One-
it works for everybody's schedule, yes.
Well, we kind of have to, because we got to have that budget discussion. So
Either that or we extend the length of the meeting to make sure we can cover business outside of the strategic plan, if that works better for everyone's schedule.
Chris, do you really think we need an hour to do this? 2 hours, an hour and a half to do this? Can we do it in an hour?
It just depends on the responses and how people feel. Like it depends. I don't know. It's hard to know until we get into it to see what people's responses and reactions are, how much they want to tweak it. Because sometimes it's a lot of conversation tweaking. Sometimes it's like, hey, that was great, awesome, we're good. Just change this word and that word, and we're set. So it's hard to know.
I'm just trying to be respectful of everybody's time. To take 3 hours out in a month is a bit much. Everybody, is everybody okay with looking at this twice in April at this point? Looks like the 13th and the 27th. Thank you, Sheldon. Anybody else? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I'm always looking to add extra meetings. Let's do it.
Colette?
Yeah, well, it depends on when we're scheduling on the 13th. Have some unmovable commitments.
What works best for you?
On the 13th, any time before 2 o'clock. Or I could move, so maybe any time before 3 o'clock.
Thank you. Margaret, are you good with the 13th and the 27th? Okay, and so am I. So I think that's the answer. We'll do it twice. We'll give the hour and a half as it needed to be for Spark Mill on the 13th and the 27th. We'll tackle the budget.
Can start at 1:30, so call it good till 3.
I'm good.
1:30 on April 11th?
Yep.
Or sorry,
No,
April
13th.
Sorry, week of the 11th. Yeah, okay, I'll send that out.
Thank you.
When is the meeting on the 27th?
Budget.
I just sent a message to Ian to see if that was on our calendars already. That's when the normally scheduled executive committee would be. Does anybody have that on their calendar right now, the 27th?
I don't.
No.
Oh, okay. I'll have to resend that out. My apologies. I tried to send it as a repeating event, but we've been running into some Zoom trouble, so I'll make sure to send that out as well.
Yeah, that's a big deal. It's because I noticed that. That's not on my calendar either.
27th of what, April?
April.
Okay, all right, okay.
Ian, thanks for sending that out. So, Chris, we've got 5 minutes left. Love to wrap up early. Is there anything else that you guys need to tackle from us?
No, we're great. Thank you.
So thank you, as always, for what you guys do. You guys are rock stars and make us better. So thank you so much for all the hard work you put in. I've actually referred you out to the Havana SPCA, so you're going to get a phone call from them on that. Remember, I work for percentages for a living. Just saying, remember that. All right, but thank you, everybody. Everybody have a great rest of their day, and
Thanks, everyone.
looking out the window, go out and enjoy the sun, man.
Yeah. All right.
See you all
thank
later.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you, bye.